It's okay. I'm just tangled in my robes here. Okay. 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 Maybe.
The opening sutra chanting. Opening the sutra.
The unsurpassed and wondrous dharma is rarely met with even hundreds of millions. Now we can see it, accept and maintain it, maybe unfold the meaning of the darkest truth.
I get the pleasure to introduce my friend, Phoebe. And I'm not gonna, I've got 15 pages here. So, Eido Phoebe Reinhart was ordained and received transmission from Reverend Shohaku Okamura. And she participated in 2 3-month Angos in Japan, 2012 and 2016. And is recognized by Sotoshu as, and then there's a very long, can you say the word?
Kokusaifu Hyoshi.
Good. Means teacher, basically Dharma teacher. She recently, in 2020, retired from working for 50 years as a physical therapist, and she's a darn good one. Yeah. She lives in Minneapolis, has 2 fine adult sons, and 2 beautiful granddaughters. Welcome, Phoebe.
Thank you. Before I begin, I'd just like to add a little bit to that. You might be interested to know that I experienced my first session here in 1978 with Katagiri Roshi. But I wasn't officially a Buddhist or a member here. In fact, I went to a Christian monastery for a while. And then I left and got married and moved to Alaska. And when I was in Alaska, I would come back once a year to have a weekend session here. And so I would just sort of pop in and pop out. So, so I was a little bit familiar, but not known. Anyway, I moved, Katagiri died when I was in Alaska, and he was never formally my teacher, but I was acquainted with him. And so when I came back, I came to MCMC, and Shohaku Okamura was the temporary abbot at that time, which is when I met him. And eventually, he ordained me, and I received transmission from him. And so today, part of the reason for all this formality and form is simply that I want to share with you the forms of my lineage. And so today, you may have seen the title of my talk. So first of all, I want to ask, so the name of the talk is Nyoho, Tangible Thusness, Living in Accord with the Dharma. So are there any people who are familiar with the word Nyoho? Okay, how many people here have been to a sesshin? Okay, how many people have Sona Rakusu? Okay, so those are all relevant to this topic. Senshinji, where I'm affiliated now, this year and last, has had a practice theme for the year. Last year it was lineage and legacy, and this year we're calling it tangible thusness. a deep investigation of the teachings of Nyoho, or things done or made in accordance with the Dharma. That's what that word means. Tangible thusness is our opportunity to experience the truth of these teachings in our everyday lives. So you don't have to remember that word, but I'm going to talk about what it means, and my primary proposal is that this is relevant for our day-to-day lives, not just in a formal setting, and that any activity can be a Dharma gate. So Nyoho means like, or in accordance with, or even the same as. So, and Ho means Dharma. So this means, so Nyoho is something consistent with or the same as the Dharma. And there are three faces of this, which are primarily the categories of food, clothing, and shelter. And I'm going to explore those in the recommendations to how you can do those things in accord with the Dharma. And I think that we can carry over those same ideas or principles to our daily life, whether we're doing formal practice or not. And so today, I would like to talk about this means to our practice and how to incorporate this value in our daily activities. I'm interested in exploring with you the question, what does it mean to approach our lives from the standpoint of Dharma or thusness? The basic question is, does this thing create attachment or clinging? It radically means nothing extra. So Nyoho is the practice of nothing extra. I also want to explore and encourage us to be aware of our actions in light of this Nyoho, and to point out that what we do matters, but also our motivation for what we do matters. So the values that I'm going to be exploring are not new. These ideas have been around since Shakyamuni Buddha, but this word for it, I'm not sure when it was first used, but I know that it was used in the early 20th century for this category of things that are in accord with the Dharma. And in my lineage, my teacher is Okumura Roshi, his teacher is Ukiyama Roshi, and his teacher is Kodo Sawaki Roshi. And so Sawaki Roshi was one of the prime people in the early 20th century to try to renew our renew this value and maybe he put a name on it. I don't know. So there are multiple lineages that incorporate into their practice, incorporate this into their practice, including Katagiri Roshi. But not all lineages do. I think my understanding is that Sawaki's hope and intention was for this to be a universal in Soto Zen, but it actually is not. So there are many lineages, especially in Japan, who, well, let me back up a minute. When we're talking about clothing, I'm talking particularly first about formal things like a rakusu or an okesa. But also, I think what I have to say will be relevant to just any clothes or anything you do or wear. Anyway, so his hope was that everybody in the Soto Zen would adopt this. They didn't. So in Japan, you'll see many okeses and rakusus that are commercially made. And this is still kind of a controversial subject amongst the Sangha. But for us, in my lineage and Katagiri's lineage, we have followed this way of doing things in accordance with the Dharma, and that includes particularly food practice, clothing, as in sewing practice, and shelter, food, clothing, and shelter, which are things we all share, and therefore the values I'm going to get into here can be relevant to any activity, but particularly those three. And so I said there's three phases of Nyoho: food, clothing, and shelter. There are also three elements of each of these. So materials, color, and amount, or size. So with each of those things, like food, what about the materials, the color, and the amount? And clothes, what about the color, materials, and amount? The primary idea being that we have just enough, nothing extra in these areas. And then there are four characteristics of these. One is unpretentious and unassuming. Using what already exists. In other words, using, in case of sewing, using fabric that already exists. And food, if you're at a monastery and they have a store of food, you would check the food. If you have the tenzo, you would check what is there and use that first before you go to the store. Honoring and maintaining our connection to our tradition and ancestors. So first, I want to explore with you these characteristics in relation to our food practice, well, and clothing and shelter. Mostly food and clothing I'm going to talk about today. Any daily activity has the potential to be a Dharma gate if we approach it with these discerning questions, if we are aware of what we are doing and why. But I want to explore particularly Nyoho food and Nyoho clothing. I'll talk about these first in the context of formal practices, but also in our day-to-day lives, how this translates to our day-to-day lives. Sawaki Roshi was particularly interested in the Nyoho of clothes, and actually there's another word for that, which is Nyoho-e, and that is the Dharma of sewing. So if you've done any sewing, you might be familiar with Tomoe Katagiri's sewing book, which is called Study of the Okesa no Nyoho-e, Buddha's Robe. So the Nyoho includes everything, but this word includes particularly sewing and rules for sewing. And so this is primarily guidelines for sewing the Buddha's robe or the rakusu in accordance with the Dharma. So accurately preserving, embodying, and transmitting Kodo Sawaki's teaching about sewing, wearing, and encountering Buddha's robe is what we're talking about. And I'm missing a page. Just a second, okay. Okay. So those three categories, materials, color, and what did I say? Size or amount. So how is that relevant to our robes or rakusus, or other things for that matter? Originally, you may know that the okesa was made out of discarded, sometimes even soiled rags, actually, that were discarded. And those were washed and bleached and then dyed to make the Buddha's robe. Now, for a practitioner. Now, we don't do that practice anymore, partly because we don't have access to those things. But but there are still some kind of guidelines that kind of apply. And one of them is even just the cutting up of the fabric. You cut up the fabric into many pieces and then you put it back together again. So it's kind of has no commercial value because it's made of scraps in a sense. So the materials were, so because of that, there's some rules. So the material would be usually a natural fiber like cotton. The color would be what we call broken or blended, no primary colors, not red, green, orange, those colors. And size to fit the person, not too little, not too big. And one of the principles of Nyoho is not wasting anything, so not wasting the fabric. So you have just enough fabric to make this, and if you don't, well, then you have to ask the sewing teacher to help you find a way around it, or get some more fabric. But the point is to try not to get more than you need. You just get what you need, and the questions related to this are, how does your clothing life enhance or hinder your aspiration? In the simple act of getting dressed, we have an opportunity to renew our vow to live the Buddha way. So what are my motivations for what I choose to wear? What am I communicating? Somewhere it says, our clothing, I already said this, should not be ostentatious, should not promote personal pride, should not be something that we are attached to. And I will say a bit later, the same with food. So, so even if we're not wearing a rakusu or an okesa, every day we get dressed and we eat and we live someplace. So those can be opportunities to ask ourselves similar questions, like, what is it, am I attached to this? Am I attached to some image of who I want people to be or people to see? Do I have more than I need? I want to tell a couple stories here. One is when I was in Japan, this is a common question in religious communities, and that is how much is too much and how much is too little, even in case of ornamentation. So one of my ongos in Japan, there was we had 10 participants, 5 from the US and 5 from Europe, and Soto Shu arranged for us to have 10 teachers, Japanese monks from around Japan. And one of them often wore a kind of ragged, patched robe and koromo. And there was a little gossip about this, even among his peers, like that they saw this as sort of disrespectful, or he's trying to be put on the front of being humble, and all those things could be true, but he heard about this and he decided to make a statement to the community. And he said, my father was my teacher, and these are his robes, and I wear them to honor him. And it was very sweet, and also points out that we don't necessarily know what someone else's motivation is. And these things in our vows are for us to discern for ourselves, not to judge somebody else about whether they're conforming to this or not. It's to help us discern those things for ourselves. So even at home, when we're dressing and undressing, sometimes there are gathas. People sometimes make up gathas to go with their particular activity. You probably have some of them here, like maybe in the bathroom, a little saying. And for example, here's one I might say at home. Shedding my clothing, I vow with all beings to cultivate roots of goodness and abandon the yoke of transgressions. Or, I vow with all beings to wear the foundations of goodness and have a sense of humility and conscience. So, there's usually kind of like 3 parts to these gathas. You're kind of vowing something, and then, in a sense, when you say, I vow with all beings, you're kind of making a vow that you're including all beings in your intention, in what you're doing. One of Kuan France's teachers said that if it's not about you, it's probably Nyoho. In other words, if it is about you, it probably is not. So our clothing is fully serving its purpose with nothing extra. And this is much clearer and easier to follow if you're in a training temple or monastery. It's very clear what you wear, what you don't wear for what, and how you wear it. But in our day-to-day lives, there's much more question about that. And I don't have the answers, I just have the questions. And to tell you a little bit about my own journey about this, when I was going to become a Catholic nun, there were a couple things. First of all, I was never took vows, so I still had my long, beautiful hair. I was young, and I had a spiritual director, and I told him I thought that I should cut it off, and he said, "Well, if you must, but will you be any less attached to it when it's off?" Because I was already attached to this image that I wanted to present. And when I left the monastery, I was still somewhat attached to an image of this like monk in the world who wears brown all the time. And I thought that I would do that the rest of my life. So I took from there a habit that I was going to wear. This was going to be my clothing. Well, you can imagine that didn't last very long. Because for one thing, the point is not to be conspicuous, and point out, I'm sort of different than you are. I mean, which is what I was doing. Actually, I didn't do it. I didn't dare, actually, once I got out in the world and realized how ridiculous that was. But anyway, but still, I had this idea, kind of an ascetic idea of giving up things, not having things, not enjoying things, not indulging myself in, desires, like, candy, pretty clothes, things like that. I don't want to be ostentatious. But this feeling kind of evolved, and I was, well, why is it that I can decorate my house for a holiday, for instance, but I don't feel free to decorate myself? I have to be bland. I have to be not noticed. I have to blend in. Anyway, I developed a quite different attitude, and that was, I became a little bit flamboyant. Like, and I am in my regular dress. I decided I really loved colors. And it was like, wearing colors was like a celebration of life. It was very joyful. And not just joyful for me, but for others. People enjoyed looking at what I was wearing. And I'd wear hats and jewelry, and so that's the way I look when I'm not here. And I'm not making any claim about that, what that means or whether it's Nyoho or not. I'm just pointing out there are different sides to this. And what the point is to look at what we're doing and why we're doing it. And the bottom line, basically, with Nyoho is that I'm not doing it to serve some selfish purpose or image or something like that. And I'm not grasping or attached to it. Now, a person could say, well, I can have as much as I want of anything because I'm not attached to any of it. That's one perspective. But that's not exactly what this is saying. We're also talking about not having more than we need in any of these areas. Now, most of us do, and I'm one of them. And so there's always, but the point is, all of these things are an opportunity for discernment. Like, what am I trying to accomplish here? What am I communicating? What is this? Am I trying to be special? Am I trying to be humble? Am I, you know, and so those are good questions to ask, I think, about any of our activities. And by asking those questions, anything can be a dharma gate. If we just, what I was suggesting is that we be aware of what we're doing and why. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about food. So the dharma of food can include the dharma of gathering food, preparing, cooking, the dharma of serving food, and even the dharma of eating food. All these things raise the question of, is this in accord with the dharma? And what does it mean to be in accord with the dharma? So this can include the question of, where does my food come from? Does it come from a wholesome place? I mean, are the people who are growing it have a wholesome practice? Are the people who are transporting it? Are the people who are producing it? Whatever, you know, there's questions kind of all along the line, which can be relevant, particularly if you're cooking for a sesshin or something, to know, where did my food come from? And is it in accord with the dharma? And so at Senshinji, so we're studying this year. We have the first quarter we're studying about clothing, the second quarter is studying about food, and the third quarter we'll be studying about shelter. And what that studying means is also discerning how we are going to embody and manifest this. So they become very interested in gardening, like they have their own garden, and they're very careful, and they get their food locally from other food they get from local farmers, and they're careful about the places where they get their food, what kind of values they have about food and growing food. And this is sort of an ongoing process, individually and communally, to discern what we're doing and why we're doing it. So there have been rules, you know, that have developed for, well, actually for food during sesshin, and for what you put in oryoki bowls. So there's nested bowls, and if you haven't done this, there's nested bowls, and there are guidelines, like in the first bowl is usually a grain, and the second bowl is usually a protein, and the third bowl is probably something like produce. And there's also, there's guidelines about color and taste. So this is, you can't see it, but this is our Senshinji format for, we have clothing in one, we have food, and we have shelter. And in the food, there's a question of whether this food is coming from right livelihood. But there's also guidelines about, there's 5 colors recommended in one meal that's encouraged to include red, white, black, green or blue, and yellow. And also 6 tastes: sweet, sour, bitter, salty, mild, and spicy. Now, in order not to trigger your passion, it's usually recommended that you not have any aromatics, you know, like garlic or onion, that are going to have this residual aftertaste, you know, and also get you kind of excited about the food. But if you follow this, if you have multiple colors and you have multiple tastes, usually the result of that is a pretty balanced, nutritious meal. And those principles could be used every day. We're not going to be cooking like this or eating like this at home, but still, some principles can still be applied. For instance, how much is enough? What is too much? Are we overeating? Are we using up our leftovers, or are we minimizing waste, or are we creating a lot of garbage? I mean, that's relevant whether in a senshin or at home. Oh, in terms of quantity, there's guidelines about quantity. Only prepare what is needed, not overeating, no waste, minimize leftovers. But specifically, there is a guideline for the first bowl is 3/4 cup, the second bowl is 1/2 cup, the third bowl is 1/4 cup. Then you multiply that by the number of participants, and then you add a half for seconds. And when you're serving, so we don't have the attitude that we make as much as possible, but we don't run out. We want really just enough. And if we run out, like if there aren't seconds for everyone, actually that's okay. That's, if we use up everything, that's even better. The food should be nutritious, but not extravagant, cost-effective, and maybe consider seasonal foods, because the foods that are in season are the best and also probably the most cost-effective. Also, using what is available. So this includes also stewardship. So for instance, if you go someplace like Ramanji, a monastery in Iowa, they have quite a stash of food, canned food and frozen food. And when they ask someone from outside to be the tenzo comes in and may have a plan. They have a meal plan, and they're going to go to the grocery store, and they're going to get all these things because this is what they want to make. And Shokin, the abbot, would say, no, you need to look first at what is here, and you need to be creative about using what is here. And only when only if there's something, you absolutely need something that isn't here, yes, you can buy it, but first, take care of what's here. And there's a lot there. But that takes a lot of creativity on the part of the tenzo. And, but it's part of the Nyoho of food practice, to use what is there. In relation to food, during a session, if you do the chants, there's one part that is the 5 contemplations. And they are, we reflect on the effort that brought us this food and consider how it comes to us. So this would include everything, not just people, but all beings, the sun, the soil, the people who grew it, the people who harvested it, the people who fixed it for us. We reflect on our virtue and practice and whether we are worthy of this offering. So the other part that's important here is this is an offering. Food is an offering. We regard it as essential to keep the mind free from excesses such as greed. So it's not fancy food that we're like coveting. It's simple, but it's nutritious. We regard this food as good medicine to sustain our life, which I think is a good way to think of food. What do we need, and how much do we need? For the sake of enlightenment, we now receive this food. So all these things can be relevant in our day-to-day practice of eating. These same questions are relevant. And that's primarily what I kind of wanted to emphasize today, that these are all opportunities to practice the Dharma. So I said earlier, the Dharma of food can include the obtaining and preparing food, cooking, serving, eating. So at Sanshinji, what we've been doing is we've been having a series of lectures, and one might be the Dharma of growing food, the Dharma of preparing food, the Dharma of cooking, the Dharma of serving, the Dharma of eating. And so one thing to think about in food, when we're thinking about what is enough or whether we're attached to it, if your hunger, is your hunger physiological or psychological? Notice the craving and aversion that we have to various foods. How much do we really need? And this doesn't mean that we should never eat spicy things or fancy things or pizza. But it's just a way of making ourselves a little bit more aware of what we're doing and why. And also being grateful, because this is an offering. When we consider how it came to us, all the beings that went into us getting this food is rather significant. So there's a reason, also a basis for being very grateful. And some teacher pointed out that, what about the case, that having an appetite is a blessing, and we take it for granted, but people who are very ill and dying sometimes don't have an appetite. Food is not appealing, no matter what it is. Now, those people are not enjoying their food, and they're probably, but we can, and we can be grateful for it, and we can save it, cherish it, and see it as an offering. And so we're blessed if we have an appetite. If you don't have an appetite, well, food doesn't matter very much. So my primary question is, can we incorporate these values into our daily lives? We all need food, clothing, and shelter. And by the way, we haven't gotten into shelter much, but what it says here is shelter is unpretentious, fit for its purpose, maybe recycled or reused, unassuming, not distracting. Space follows function, and function follows space. So at Sanshinji, we're just beginning to explore that category, so we don't have a lot to say about it yet. But it's, you know, about your housing, your shelter. I have a friend who has a small little house. He's an artist, and he has a small little house in northeast Minneapolis. And most of us would think that that was just fine, but he asked the Tibetan monks in his neighborhood to come and bless his house, which they did, but then they said that this was way too much for one person, because he had more than one bedroom. And so, you know, it's all kind of relative and takes some discernment to determine what is appropriate, what is okay, even what is okay for me to own, and how do I use what I own, and what do I offer to others. So what is our motivation for having what we have? The primary point is to be aware and awake to the dharma gates that are available in all aspects of life, no matter how mundane. Anything can be a dharma gate. Any activity, not just food, shelter, and clothing. And that is my message for today. And I'm open to your input and questions and discussion.
So a comment and a question. Downstairs we have bathrooms, and the plumbing is a little old. During a practice period, one of the students pointed out how meaningful there was a sign by the toilet that says, "Nothing extra, clogs easily." I share that with my people at work. My question is so everything in your talk was so wonderful, and it resonates so deeply with me. How do you prevent the pendulum from swinging too far to the side? So how do you bring, maybe you, or how do you guide somebody, how do you prevent from going way too far and the attachment to the detachment becomes a problem?
That is a problem and a risk. And that's kind of what I was doing when I was like, well, first I'm going to be a monk, you know, in the world. And then I'm going to be this flamboyant, you know, whatever. I don't really have advice about that, except for people to I think our practice helps us refine our discernment and intuition so that we become more sensitive to those questions and answers. What is appropriate for me? And who is the I that is doing this? You know, I mean, am I trying to prove something? Am I trying to be something to other people or look a certain way? So even when I was in the Catholic monastery, there was a question, it was cloistered, so people didn't go out, but occasionally they went out. And there was disagreement about whether they should wear a veil when they went out, because some people saw it as a very inviting for, you know, like people see this and feel invited to respond to them or be reminded of just, you know, questions of life. and some of them felt like it was very off-putting because they were distinguishing themselves from the regular people. And this would actually be a turn-off. Nobody would want to approach them with somebody with a veil. And so that's kind of, you know, an example of the extremes of thinking. They're not wrong. And we, I guess, need to figure out what is the middle way for us and what is it we're saying? What is it we're saying with what we're doing? Another example in the monastery was there was a group. We were the Order of St. Clare. We were called the Poor Clares, and our primary vow was poverty. And so we didn't do any work to earn money. We lived only on alms. We didn't save money, and then there was the simplicity. But what is how far to go with that? So there was a group that broke off from this and started their own community and went to a poor neighborhood in Chicago, and so this was a very small group, just maybe less than 5, but they had debates almost immediately about what to cover their altar with. Some people said you should use a sheet. Some people said, well, that was disrespectful. You should have something that's, you know, sort of if not ornate, at least special. You know, and so I think this is really an ongoing question for everyone to find what is the middle way.
Thank you. I'm glad, thank you for your talk. I'm glad you're here today because I'm hoping you can help me resolve something I've been thinking about for a while. Color specifically. I recently came to this center about a year and a half ago, and I decided I was enjoying myself so much I wanted to go to a retreat. I just wanted to jump in and try to see what happened. And I got an email before the retreat with some guidelines about what to bring and everything, and there was a sentence in there that said, please wear muted colors.
Muted?
Muted.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And me being me, I started to overthink it.
You probably thought you had to go out and buy a costume or something.
Well, I had been here, so I kind of see what's going on. But, you know, I have my clothes. I don't have some of the clothes that are worn here. And I started to think about what is a muted color. And then I started to think about, well, what is color? It's just wavelengths going through the air. And that's not even color, it's the color hitting our photoreceptors in our eyes. And there's some people that are trichromats and some that are tetrachromats that can see 100 million colors instead of just 10 million. Yes, this is all of the things that I'm thinking about. And so but what I was reflecting on, so I'm going to the retreat again this year, so I have to pack my bags. I don't know how I did with the first time. I think I did okay. No one said anything. But people tend not to say anything here, even if I did it wrong.
Did great, Dave.
You're awesome. I realized during your talk what was going on, and I wanted to be accepted by the Sangha. so that was the attachment that I was wrestling with when I was trying to figure out what clothes to bring. And I'm not sure I need it to be resolved. I hear I did fairly well, but at least from one person, I don't know. Anyway, that's what I think about when I hear about color. And
So I think these things, the risk of some of these things is to do that, to overly analyze our own motivations. Actually, that was one of my problems in the monastery and one of the reasons I left, because I found that I had become very self-centered, and I was always looking at these things, my behavior. Did it mean this? Did it mean that? Was I doing the right thing? Oh, I better go confess this, you know. And it was all about me. And I recognized that that was not healthy, and that was not why I went there. I went there, I thought, to serve the world, you know. And here I was, so preoccupied. I called it pathological introspection. I mean, it was quite extreme. And so for some reason, this environment, that's how I responded to this environment. And I loved it there. I didn't want to leave, but I could see what I was doing was certainly not spiritually helpful, wasn't psychologically helpful, and maybe someone could have helped me get out of that, but for me, I felt I needed to leave. And so I think we can overdo that, you know, self-reflection and discernment. And to some extent, we need to sort of just let it go. You know, I mean, like, so you have this information, you have to make a decision, you make a decision, it might have, you have no idea what the impact might be. It might be good, it might not be good, but you just do the best you can and then you let it go. In other words, do everything with good intentions, trying to do your best, but then when it fails, you let it go like it doesn't matter, because it really doesn't matter, actually. It's like everything matters and nothing matters.
I still don't know how to pack my bag.
Actually, I think you do know.
Maybe I do.
Yes.
I'm really pleased to have heard your talk, and especially about clothing. Like most Americans, I sometimes overdress, sometimes spend too much money on clothes. But this piece, I wasn't looking for it. I like to shop at thrift shops instead of buying new clothes. By coincidence, I saw this, and I knew that I was born within, by the time I was a teenager, I could have walked to the Tuscarora Reservation. And so besides liking horses and liking leather, I remember a picture of a chief with a tear in his eye. And that's who I identify with. Since even before I became a Buddhist. From the first time I became wholly in touch with nature in Northern Ontario. So I'm so proud to stand up for Native Americans who we've never given their rights.
Thank you for sharing. I also go to thrift stores. That's partly how I redeem myself. I don't spend a lot. I give away a lot too. But anyway, I don't know if that's okay or not. I'm not claiming it is. I'm just saying that that's kind of the way I am right now. Is anybody familiar with the program Elsbeth? Well, I'm a little bit like Elsbeth. She was very outrageous, very nicely made, fitting, stylish, but outrageous kind of outfits. And I kind of identify with so because me, it's like it's me expressing joy, kind of about living, and that's a totally different thing. I mean, anyway, so I have fun. We can have fun. It's okay.
So, first of all, I had kind of a realization when you were talking about Dharma gates. And whenever I said the vows over and over again, I think of Dharma gates as like something that our teacher is going to tell us. And wow, your talk like just said no. Every question that you ask yourself is a Dharma gate. So my dilemma here is life is really busy, life is really challenging. A lot of times for getting dinner on the table, it's just like we have to have something. And yet my inner tendency is to want to take the time to think carefully about like where my food is coming from and how this is happening. So my question is, how do we balance that need for like hurry, just get ourselves some food versus let's take some time to really think about how we're doing this?
Well, I don't have the answer for you or anyone else, but someone else raised a similar question and said, can I, if I order DoorDash, can that be Nyoho? I thought that's a good question. Can it be? I don't know. But I mean, we also need to be practical with our lives, you know, and guilt about not doing the right thing is not very helpful or motivating. So that is not, hopefully that is not the result of our discernment, to feel guilty about what we're not doing. That's not the point. And in our busy day-to-day lives, that's a good question. But part of what's important, I think, is the question. See, because even when you order your DoorDash or whatever you're doing, you still have that question. I mean, like this person did. Well, can this be Nyoho? In other words, caring enough about those things to ask the question.
I want to interject here. I'm sorry. Tim online would like to ask a question.
Okay.
Go ahead, Tim.
Okay.
Hear me okay? Yeah, thanks for your discussion on Nyoho. That was new to me, but it reminded me of my wife just the other day was telling me about a one-panel cartoon. I think it was a New Yorker cartoon where there was a completely packed subway car at rush hour, standing room only, and there was a man sitting on the seat, and no one was sitting on either side of him. And on his T-shirt it said, "Ask me about my religion." And yeah, I think there's some aspect there of humility. It sounds like you were talking about.
I don't know. Is that humility?
No, I'm saying that's the opposite of humility.
Oh, okay.
What I thought
okay.
you were talking about was
Gotcha.
like, how can we get some, I guess my question is, how can we get some humility?
How can we what?
Get some humility.
Oh. Well, maybe he got a little humility by no one sitting next to him.
Right. Very good.
There are consequences.
I think we have time for maybe one more in there.
Okay, one more question.
Oh, she's just had her.
Okay.
I really wrestled with this question quite a while ago when I was working with my teacher, Milton, who was from the Nebraska Zen Center. And I'm an artist, both in visual arts, and I worked in theater. And that world was always colorful, flamboyant, wild, crazy, creative. And then my Zen life, it was quiet, subdued. And so said, I'm really having a hard time bringing these two parts of my life together as they're diametrically opposed. And he said to me, when I paint the outside of the window, I don't wear my okesa.
I don't what?
I don't wear my okesa. When I go to the opera, I don't wear my paint clothes. Every career has their costume. The point is appropriate response, which comes back to your own motivation.
Thank you.